It's really interesting to think about the contrast between collective giving and what often gets labeled as or tax benefited as philanthropy. And to examine that in contrast to, say, Giving USA, which comes out and says a lot of people are choosing not to give because they look at others in their community and they're saying those rich people over there can give. It really splits it up into an us versus them, into silos, like so many other things in our world today. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be joined today by Sara Lomelin, founding CEO of Philanthropy Together.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandolon. I'm super excited to be here with you.
I'm excited to be here as well. The issues that you're tackling at Philanthropy Together, which we'll get into, are really near and dear to me in terms of democratizing and diversifying who sees themselves as a philanthropist, who can get involved. So I'm very excited for the conversation, but I'd love to start if you could just tell us a bit about Philanthropy Together and your overall mission.
Thank you. Yes, as you mentioned, Philanthropy Together is on a mission to democratize and diversify philanthropy globally in order to expand who and what gets funded. And the way we do this, we do it through storytelling, through training, research, and advocacy. So Philanthropy Together is really ushering in a new era of philanthropy that is democratic, diverse, and powered by people acting in solidarity, with a goal to scale and strengthen all models of collective giving, giving circles, collaborative funds, fundraising circles, women's funds, and so many more models of collective giving.
That's amazing work. And a lot of the conversations around democratizing philanthropy here in the US, at least, are centered on issues and means of diversifying this field that are very US centric. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to do that work in a global context? And I think our listeners would love a personal story or moment that illustrates why that work is important.
The concept of people banding together to create change is as old as humanity itself.
Yeah.
It's definitely not new, not American. It's rooted in cultures and communities across the globe. So it's really important to understand and appreciate these ways of generosity that have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. I have so many stories, but a story of why Philanthropy Together is needed. We have become, in 3.5 years, the spokesperson of the spokes is the entity for collective giving. We were really putting collective giving on the spotlight. A lot of people tell us like, oh my God, what you're doing is really innovative. And we said, no, it's not innovative. We're going back to the roots of generosity, of humanity. We're just putting a spotlight on it. And a big moment was last year in 2022 when I had the privilege of getting invited to do a TED Talk around collective giving. And at the end of that TED Talk in Vancouver, people were coming to me. This woman came with tears in her eyes saying, oh my God, what you just mentioned is exactly what I was needed, what I was looking for, what was needed in my life. So really making people feel seen and heard and invited into this work, it has given me a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah. And I know I felt that myself. It's so true that these fundamental principles are universal. Families banding together to help a member of the family who can't afford to go to school, or the school lunch programs here in the US were started by groups who recognized that there were students in their community who just couldn't eat. And so they banded together to provide meals, which later became an institution here. And I think that work is so fundamental to just what it means to be human. And these funds are on the rise, right? What has that rise been like? What has this journey been like? And can you explain, I think, for our audience, a little bit of the difference between some of the forms that these collective giving efforts can take? For example, giving circles versus collaborative funds.
Yes, totally. And before I get into that, I love what you mentioned, Brandolon, because a lot of times communities like your community, like my community, I'm Latina, we are seen as recipients of philanthropy, but not as philanthropists. And it's time to change those
Yeah.
perceptions and those assumptions. So that is why I am so passionate about the work. But your question is great, right? What is the difference between a giving circle and a collaborative fund? And the reality is that they are very similar. Both models include a community of people with shared values that come together, and they pool donations to multiply the power of their gift. So giving circles most often bring together everyday donors, right, into larger communities of 50 or even more than 100 donors, and are often volunteer run and use democratic decision making. And on the other hand, collaborative funds most often bring together high net wealth donors or institutional funders to give together. And those funding decisions range from being donor-led, staff-led, or community-led. And then collaborative funds are most often their own organizational entity with its own staff and offers ongoing wraparound support to the grantees they support. So our team is particularly excited about the rise of collaborative funds with lived experience leadership at the front lines of decision making. But the beautiful nature of this way of giving is how they build on one another. For example, DASRA is a collaborative fund in India that started as a number of giving circles coming together and have since then given more than $300 million to social change work in India. Another one is a Pillars Fund, which began as a Muslim giving circle and has now granted almost $10 million and does a range of narrative change work. So all collective giving models are very intertwined. A lot of women's funds started as giving circles.
Yeah. And I know from some previous work that I did, I ran a Gates-funded program out of Global Impact called Grow Fund. And we worked with Grow Fund, we worked with giving circles, and it was honestly crazy to hear how some of the challenges they were facing. They were sending checks, paper checks. This was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, in the mail across the country to the giving circle leader who put them in a bank account, and just tremendous challenges, but still people coming together for women's funds and other issues to do this work. And I know that landscape has changed a lot over the past, particularly the past 5 or 6 years. What are some of the challenges that these groups face in trying to come together to engage in collective giving and philanthropy?
Yes, you mentioned the managing of the funds. That's always the big question, especially globally. Because here in the US, especially after the pandemic, you mentioned Growth Fund. There's also Just Fund. There's also Grapevine. So there are many platforms now where giving circles and collaborative funds can manage their money. But globally, there is a big need for this. In some countries, there are some platforms, like, for example, HipGive is in the US and also in Mexico and some countries in Latin America. But every time we go virtually on Zoom to different countries to talk to Giving Circle members. That's the first question, right? How do we handle the funds? And as you may know, some Giving Circles are hosted by community foundations, by faith organizations like Jewish Federation. So some giving circles are hosted by institutions, some use these tech platforms, some are still sending checks to organizations. But I would say that the biggest challenge that we are seeing now is engagement, right? And have been since 2020. Why? Because there are so many competing ways for an individual to spend their time, right? Our attention span is getting shorter and shorter. And collective giving really thrives on personal connections, creating a space for in-person interaction to really host brainstorms, meet for coffee, listen to stories, share a meal together. So that is a need that we see across the field. And now that after the pandemic, or there were in the last few months of the pandemic, we're seeing that appetite for groups to go back in person, right? To re-engage all those members that they lost a little bit during the pandemic years. And And really how I feel is this competing for people's attention. I don't know if you have noticed, but everybody signs up for I don't know how many courses or trainings online. And then at the end of the day, you show up for just a fraction of everything that you signed up for. So we need to figure out how we change that. But the landscape definitely has changed. It definitely has changed. The last research that we had was done in 2016 by the Collective Giving Research Group. And now super happy. And by the time this podcast will be out, we will have the results for the updated landscape of giving circles that was done in partnership with the Johnson Center for Philanthropy, Michael Layton as lead researcher, and Adriana Lozon Ceballos from Colmena Consulting. And it is very exciting to see the growth of the movement, how more diverse giving circles have been popping up, involving younger people, the LGBTQ community, diverse communities, and more importantly, the organizations that these giving circles are funding, right? A lot of times giving circles act as seed funders for grassroots nonprofits, tiny nonprofits that are invisible for traditional philanthropy. And I really think this is the sweet spot for collective giving. Really go outside of the box in finding the groups that are trusted by the communities, that are community-led, and supporting those organizations. And again, I also believe that collective giving and collective giving groups are mini labs of civic engagement. And we have seen the relationship between being part of a collective giving group and being more civically engaged in your community.
It's really interesting to think about the contrast between collective giving and what often gets labeled as or tax benefited as philanthropy. And to examine that in contrast to, say, Giving USA, which comes out and says a lot of people are choosing not to give because they look at others in their community and they're saying, those rich people over there can give. And it really splits it up into an us versus them, into silos, like so many other things in our world today. And I'm just curious to dig a little deeper there into, this may be a vague question, so I apologize if it's not unclear, but I'm just curious about that, to dive a little deeper into that human experience and what makes collective giving potentially a counter to the engagement problems faced in other parts of the social impact sector or the philanthropic sector. What makes it special for the people who engage in it?
I love this question. And actually, I had the opportunity at the beginning of this year to present at the Generosity Commission in DC. And yes, we're seeing that there is this generosity crisis, less people are giving. And my response, and a lot of the people that presented that way, is that maybe we also have a little bit of an issue in how we track the ways of giving, right? Because traditionally, we're tracking the dollars that people give to established nonprofits, to 501c3s. And we are not tracking these informal ways of generosity. That is why I love what Giving Tuesday is doing with their data commons, right? And full disclosure, I sit on the board of Giving Tuesday. So I am very, I'm very moved and extremely interested in what they're doing, because generosity and philanthropy is not only about moving money. In collective giving, we talked about the 5 T's, right? You give your treasure, which is your financial contribution. You give your time, so it's your volunteer time. You give your skills or your talents. You give your ties and your testimony. And your ties and your testimony are key, because you and I are part of a lot of different networks, right? We're part of our colleagues, our family, our neighbors, and we can open incredible doors to those organizations and causes that we care about. And a lot of times those doors that we open for those organizations are going to be more impactful than the amount of money that we can donate. And then your testimony, right? Our voices. How can we elevate the work of the organizations that we care about? How can we, and it can be something as simple as signing up for the newsletters of organizations, following them on social media, talking about their work when we are with our friends and family. The way of collective giving and the first part of it, which is not solo philanthropy, it's a community of people. It's
Yeah.
extremely important to attack what we're seeing around polarization, around isolation. Because when you are in community with others and you talk about the values that guide your individual giving and you find those common values for the group, even though you and I could be very different and have very different perspectives in a lot of things, we are going to find that unite us instead of what takes us apart. And
Mhm.
that is an important exercise in democracy because we're going to put our individual decision in the back burner for the decision of the group. I mentioned last year in the TED Talk that in a given circle, in a collaborative fund, you always come with something to share and you always leave with something learned. And we have seen people that come from different ways of life that wouldn't never been around the same table if it wasn't because of a collective giving group. So for me, that is something that is extremely important. I am the mother of three young adults, right? And my children are extremely generous. But I don't think they give to traditional nonprofits, right? They give to movement leaders, they give to individuals, they give to initiatives. They are not looking for a tax deduction receipt or anything like that. And I feel that we, the big P philanthropy field, we need to change with how the new generation is engaging and giving.
Yeah. And have you seen some of that change? Is that change happening?
Yes. Yes, definitely. More people are giving to 501c4s, right? For example, there is a big network of political giving circles called the States Project. And also, I feel that it's important to mention that it depends like the level of giving. You will always have the people that do want that tax deduction and people that are altruistic. And I'm rooting for the second group a lot more. But yes, something that I forgot to mention to Brandolon about stories of impact, and I know you're interested about the global work, the rise and the momentum that collective giving is having in different countries around the world is really exciting. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to just give a lecture to a group of philanthropic advisors in Singapore. So it was like my 10 p.m. It was their morning. I was on a Zoom call. And after that, a few weeks later, a group of them reached out and said, we want to just jump on a call with you because we were very inspired by the work of Philanthropy Together and we want to start giving circles in Singapore. And long story short, they have now 6 giving circles. They had articles on the press. They're doing incredible work. And that is extremely important for us to see that we were able to support people that are super far away from us. In China, the Shanghai United Foundation had 3 giving circles 3 years ago, and right now have more than 30 giving circles. All of our materials, they took all of our materials, they translated everything. Most of our materials are in English, Spanish, Mandarin, German, and now in the next couple of weeks in Portuguese. And we're open. We're open for other people to come and say, we need these resources and these materials in another language, and we'll work with whoever wants to learn with us and to work with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. And you mentioned this before, and I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the point you made around these groups really having the potential to move resources to underfunded groups and issues, really almost to act as seed funding for really small nonprofits that get ignored by philanthropy. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And then I think our audience would love to hear, I think it's very powerful to hear a story of when that's happened and the impact that it's had, a small nonprofit that has been able to do so much more just because of that seed funding. I think that's an incredible dynamic. I'd love to dive a little deeper.
Yes, totally. Again, a lot of members of giving circles and collaborative funds are members from the community. right? Same community that they represent. So a lot of these power dynamics and power lines get totally blurred. And that is extremely important because you have the voices in the community in the decision-making process. And I have many stories. One that I love to tell about, I spent 8 years of my career at the Latino Community Foundation in San Francisco. And I started the Latino Giving Circle network there. So the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle, as the name says it all, it's a group of young professionals that work in the San Francisco Bay Area in different tech companies. So from the big ones like Google and Meta and all those companies, and also small startups. And they had their funding priorities was to diversify the tech industry by getting more Latinos into tech, right? So offering more programs to Latino children and youth to become coders. So one of the members of the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle nominated a group one time to be invited to receive a grant. And this group is called Digital Nest. And at that point, Digital Nest was a small nonprofit in Watsonville, which is a very agricultural area in California. And Digital Nest, the beautiful place. You go in and you feel that you are in one of these big tech companies because what they created was a nest for the children of farm workers and children in rural areas to come and learn how to code, how to build websites, how to do digital marketing, how to record podcasts. So all these digital skills that nothing like that existed in the community. So Digital Nest was in Watsonville. And then that year, Digital Nest got $10,000 from the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle. And they also became part of the family of grantees or community partners of the Latino Community Foundation. And by being part of this family, a few years after that, they were invited to be part of the Latino nonprofit accelerator of the foundation. And right now, Digital Nest, because of the accelerator, the relationships with the Giving Circle, the relationships with the foundation, has three other, I'm not going to say shops, but three other nests in different areas of California, and they're opening more. Digital Nest budget has increased more than tenfold. And one of those children, those teenagers that was formed at Digital Nest and knew that the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle was supporting them, the very first time that he got an internship at a big tech firm and got a signing bonus, he gave half of his signing bonus to Digital Nest to thank them. And then the other half, he gave it to be part of the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle. So, it's a beautiful story because it's full circle. And now Martin, this young guy, he is on the board of Digital Nest and recruiting more board members to Digital Nest. So it's just this beautiful ecosystem of power, love, joy, and what you can do and to transform a community. So that is just one of many stories that I have.
It's a great story. And it really does demonstrate how we can move philanthropy, and it really can be more effective if we think about strategically moving it beyond just a transaction. Here you go, here's a check, goodbye, to creating community, creating an ecosystem. When you think about that work, I always like to ask about urgency so that anyone listening can get a sense of why it's important to support Philanthropy Together and the work you're doing today and now rather than later. Would love to get your perspective on that.
Yes, totally. So why now? All the money in the world is not going to save us. I think beloved communities will, in this story that I told you about. So for me, the important call to action to everybody that is listening to us is join a community, join a giving circle, join a giving project, join a women's fund, join a collaborative. Why is this important? Collaborative funds and giving circles have charted a course that differs from this traditional philanthropy. They tilt towards equity and justice and feel that movement building. There is more leaders of color in collaborative funds. And for a growing number, they are shifting that power to community-led decision making. And that is how transformation of a big field like philanthropy can happen, right? Little by little. So it's that. It's just don't overthink it. This is something that everyone can do at any level. I have another beautiful story that I always say about this young woman in Arizona. Her mom is part of a giving circle and she wanted to do something herself. And she got 80 teenagers to start the giving circle.
Oh, wow.
And each of them, it's a lot of teenagers. Each of them gives $25 every quarter. And they support organizations that work with adolescents and teenagers around mental health, around homelessness, around substance addiction. And she is now teaching other teenagers around the US how to start their groups, because at the end of the day, people, this is not rocket science. It's going back to our shared humanity. And again, if you have a few dollars to give and you want to do it in an intimate way, join or start the Giving Circle. On our website, you can see we have a directory of Giving Circles near you. If you are a high net wealth individual or an institutional funder, join a collaborative fund. If you have a family foundation, I'm not telling you to change your whole strategy and your whole giving portfolio towards collaboratives, but add a collaborative fund to your philanthropy portfolio, to your giving portfolio. It's a very powerful way of giving and a scale.
Yeah, I love that. And as we get too close to a close here, what advice do you have for someone thinking about their journey to impacts and they're listening and they're wanting to explore giving circles? Where do they start?
They start just literally going to our website. Everything that you see there is free of charge. We have, if you don't find a giving circle existing around you that gets your attention, start your own. We have trainings every single month. I promise it's going to be a lot of fun for you. And we have a lot of resources. You can always reach out to me or anyone on my team to just bounce ideas. If you're part of a community foundation and you have been, playing with the idea of hosting giving circles, but you are not sure if it's right for you, reach out to us. We're literally always open to get on a call with you, no matter where you are, in which country or which time zone you are. Our mission, we want to see more people engaged in collective giving, because we really believe is the way that we can move the needle and we can change not only who gives, but how we give and what gets funded. And that's extremely important.
Thank you so much, Sara. This has been a conversation with Sara Lomelin, with Founding's Executive Director or CEO of Philanthropy Together. And it's been such a pleasure. Before we close out, how can our listeners learn about Philanthropy Together?
You can just go to philanthropytogether.org. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or X. And yes, just listening to this podcast and just following us on social media and on our website. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
And listen to our TED Talks. We have two. We have mine, Sara Lomelin, on the TED platform, and then also one especially around collaborative funds that our dear colleague Rebecca Darwent recorded at the beginning of this year.
Awesome. We will promote those as well so that folks can learn more about your organization and your mission. Thank you so much. It truly has been a pleasure. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandolon. This has been a pleasure of mine.